A Chinese girl begged a mountain man, "They're beating my mama for being Chinese. Please save her and marry her." What he did next shocked the cruel settlers. The first sound was not wind but a scream. Thin, high, and breaking, like a wire snapping under too much strain. It came again, carried ragged on the frozen air, and then another sound joined it. The dull slap of fists striking flesh, the coarse laughter of men who thought themselves untouchable. Snow muffled much in the valley, but not that. Not cruelty. Jonas Graham had been sharpening a blade when it reached him. He froze mid-draw, steel held still against whetstone, listening. For months he had lived alone in that cabin tucked against the slope, nothing but his own breath and the crack of pine to keep him company. His life was pared down to meat, fire, and silence. But that scream tore through his walls and into his marrow. He pushed the knife aside, the scar on his jaw tightening with emotion, and rose. He was halfway to the door when pounding rattled it. Too light to be a man's fists. More frantic, more desperate. Jonas swung it open, and a child all but fell inside. A girl, Chinese, maybe 10 at most, her face flushed raw from the cold, hair tangled and damp with snowmelt. Her small hands clutched at his coat like claws. "They're beating her," she gasped, chest hitching with sobs. "My mama. Please. They're hurting her, 'cause she's Chinese." "You," her words caught on her own fear, then came tumbling in a rush. "You gotta save her. You gotta marry her so they stop. Please." For a long beat Jonas only looked at her. His eyes were dark, unreadable beneath the heavy brow, the face of a man long used to quiet, not please. But the girl's grip would not let him retreat into silence. He could feel the tremor of her hands, the damp of her tears soaking his shirt. And when she raised her face to him, eyes wide, shining with both terror and stubborn hope, it cut through something calcified inside him. He did not speak. He only reached for his rifle. The girl stumbled after him as he stepped into the storm. The snow stung, driven sideways by the wind, sharp as needles against skin. Jonas pulled his coat tighter, shifted the rifle in his hands, and followed the child's small figure as she led him down through the timber. Their breaths showed white in the dark, their boots breaking crusted ice with every step. The closer they drew to the settlement's edge, the clearer the sounds became. Shouts. Jeers. The slap of hands striking, boots kicking. Then her voice, softer, choked, but defiant all the same. A woman's voice. Jonas felt the muscles in his back knot. They reached the clearing near the shack. The girl darted to the side, crouching behind stacked wood, whispering. "There, there." Jonas kept moving, slow and deliberate. 6 men stood ringed around a slight figure. A woman in threadbare clothes, hair dark as raven's wing though streaked with snow, cheeks bruised already purple. She staggered but stood, clutching her arms around herself as if to hold her ribs together. Each time she tried to straighten, another shove knocked her sideways. Laughter cut the night open. Jonas stepped from shadow into lantern light. His boots sank deep into the snow. His presence stopped the nearest man mid-jeer. Heads turned. "Well, well," one spat. "The hermit's come down. This ain't your business, Graham. Go back to your hole." Jonas said nothing. He only let the rifle rest easy in his grip, barrel angled low but steady. His silence carried more weight than shouting. The woman's eyes lifted toward him, unfocused from swelling but sharp with disbelief. "Look at him," another sneered. "Maybe he wants her too. Don't reckon he's touched a woman in years." The laughter returned, sharper. One man shoved the woman forward so she sprawled in the snow. She coughed, spitting blood onto white drift. The girl whimpered from behind the woodpile. Jonas moved then. Swift. Not with words but with the butt of his rifle, swung hard into the jaw of the closest brute. The crack of bones snapped through the air. The man fell like a tree. Shouts erupted. They came at him. 2 rushed together. Jonas swung again, rifle stock smashing ribs. He pivoted, drove his shoulder into another's chest, sending him sprawling. Fists landed against his back, one catching his temple. He grunted, staggered, but his grip did not falter. The woman scrambled away on hands and knees, the girl darting to her side. Snow churned beneath boots, lanterns swinging wild light across faces twisted with rage. Jonas's fist drove into a throat, another man doubled, choking. One rushed with a knife, slashing wide. Jonas caught his wrist, twisted until the blade dropped, then slammed the man's head into the post of the shack. The fight was ugly, close, breath steaming in the frozen dark. Jonas bled from a cut at his brow, one eye already swelling. Still he stood, immovable, the storm howling around him like a second ally. When at last the last man staggered back, clutching a broken nose, the others pulled him away, spitting curses. "This ain't over," one shouted, voice raw with rage and humiliation. "You'll regret crossing us, Graham. That yellow whore won't save you." They dragged their injured into the dark, boots crunching until only silence and storm remained. Jonas turned, chest heaving. The girl clung to her mother, whispering, "Mama, Mama." The woman tried to rise, swayed. Jonas stepped forward, bent, and without ceremony lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than she should have been. Her breath hitched against his shoulder, warm even through blood and frost. She did not resist. The girl followed close, lantern bobbing in her hand, casting trembling circles of light on the snow. Together they left the shack, the night swallowing behind them the stench of smoke and cruelty. Jonas's boots pressed a new trail into the drifts, leading up, away, toward the mountains where his cabin waited. For a time, only the crunch of snow and the girl's quick breaths filled the night. Jonas did not look down at the woman in his arms. Not yet. But he felt the flutter of her pulse against his neck, heard the soft murmur in a language he did not know. He tightened his hold. The girl stumbled once, lantern nearly falling. Jonas paused, shifted the woman's weight with care, and reached to steady the child. Her small hand clutched his scarred one for a moment before letting go. They pressed on. When at last the cabin's outline loomed through snow, the girl gave a small cry of relief. Jonas pushed the door wide, warmth spilling from the banked fire inside. He laid the woman gently on the bedstead, coarse blankets pulled over her. The girl dropped the lantern and climbed beside her, stroking her face. Jonas stood a long moment, rifle still in his hand, his own blood dripping onto the floorboards. His silence held, heavy as the mountains themselves. He turned then to bar the door, each iron bolt sliding into place with finality. Behind him the woman whispered in halting English, voice breaking yet firm, "Why, help!" Jonas did not answer. He only met her gaze for the first time, seeing not weakness but a fire banked deep, flickering through pain. And in that look, a promise unspoken settled heavy between them. The girl, eyes wide, whispered once more into the hush, "You'll marry her now, won't you?" The words hung there, fragile as ice crystals, daring the silence to break. Outside, the wind keened against the shutters, carrying with it the certainty that what had begun tonight was not finished. Snow rattled against the shutters like small, persistent fists, but within the cabin a frail warmth began to gather. The fire had been coaxed higher, its glow throwing shadows long against the timbered walls. Jonas sat near the hearth, stripped of his coat, the muscles in his arms corded as he worked the edge of a log with his knife. The scrape of steel against wood punctuated the hush. Behind him, on the narrow bed, the woman lay half-raised, her child curled at her side. The girl had fallen into a fitful sleep, breath hitching now and again with leftover sobs. Her small fingers clutched at her mother's sleeve as though afraid she might vanish if let go. The woman's other hand trembled where it rested on the blanket, knuckles swollen from the night's ordeal. Her lips, split and bruised, parted once to speak, but no words came. Jonas turned his head slightly, watching without appearing to watch. He saw the shallow rise and fall of her chest, the way her eyes stayed open though exhaustion dragged at her. He recognized that kind of vigilance. He'd lived it after fever took his own wife, nights spent awake because sleep felt like surrender. He rose finally, knife sliding back into its sheath. Crossing the room in 3 strides, he set a tin cup on the small table and filled it with hot water from the pot. He crushed dried herbs between his fingers, letting them fall into the steaming liquid, their scent sharp and earthy. Without asking, he placed it near her hand. She startled at the closeness, dark eyes lifting to his. For a long moment she only looked at him, her breath shallow. Then, slowly, she wrapped her fingers around the cup. The warmth seeped into her skin. She brought it to her lips, sipping, wincing as the heat touched the cuts inside her mouth. Yet she drank, because he had offered. Jonas said nothing. He returned to the fire, sat again, his face turned toward the flames. Silence settled thick. Yet in that silence something shifted, no longer the empty quiet of solitude, but the tentative quiet of strangers forced together. After a time, she spoke, voice faint, accented but clear. "My name is Mei Lin." Jonas did not answer at once. He leaned forward, feeding a stick to the flames, watching them leap. At last, he said, rough with disuse, "Jonas." The sound of names between them hung in the air, soft but binding. The girl stirred then, murmuring in her sleep. Mei Lin smoothed her daughter's hair with a shaking hand, her lips moving in a lullaby too quiet for Jonas to catch. The melody was unlike anything he had heard before, low, lilting, carrying sorrow and sweetness together. It filled the cabin more than words could. Jonas's knife stilled in his hand. He felt the tune thread through him, awakening corners of memory he thought buried, his wife humming by lamplight, a cradle rocking. He clenched the knife tighter, grounding himself in the present. When the song ended, only the crackle of fire remained. Mei Lin's gaze drifted to Jonas. "You saved us." He shook his head once. "Men like that don't stop easy. They'll come again." Her jaw tightened. She lowered her eyes. "Then we should go." The suggestion cut into him sharper than he expected. Go. He should want that. He had lived for years without the weight of others. Yet the thought of them stepping back into that storm, back toward a world waiting to break them again, filled him with something like unease. He looked at the girl asleep, small chest rising and falling beneath the quilt. Then at Mei Lin, her face marred but her gaze steady even in fear. He said only, "Not tonight." She studied him for a long breath. Something unspoken passed between them, acknowledgment, perhaps, or the first glimmer of reluctant trust. She nodded. Hours crawled. Jonas tended the fire, listening to the storm batter the cabin. Mei Lin dozed sitting up, roused by every gust, every crack of timber. Each time, she looked to the girl, reassured herself, then sagged again. Jonas caught the weariness in her eyes. Without a word, he stood, pulled a blanket from the peg, and draped it over her shoulders. She stiffened at his closeness, then eased beneath the weight of wool. Her lips parted as if to thank him, but she only lowered her gaze. Jonas returned to his place, arms resting heavy on his knees. He stared at the fire until his vision blurred. It had been years since another's breath filled this space. The cabin felt changed already, as though the walls themselves leaned in to listen. Morning brought a gray light, filtering weak through frost-glazed panes. The storm had settled into steady snowfall, quiet as ash. The girl woke first, rubbing her eyes, cheeks still blotched from crying. She looked at Jonas with the open curiosity of children, unsoftened by manners. "You're big," she said. Jonas lifted a brow, but said nothing. He ladled porridge into 3 bowls. Mei Lin tried to rise and faltered, pain flaring in her ribs. Jonas was beside her instantly, one hand steadying her elbow. She stiffened at his touch, pride flashing in her eyes, but she let him help her sit. The girl accepted her bowl eagerly, blowing steam from its surface. They ate in silence, the sound of spoons scraping tin the only measure of time. Mei Lin's gaze flicked now and again toward Jonas, studying the lines of his face, the scar at his jaw. He felt it, though he did not look up. When the meal was done, Jonas pulled the girl's small shoe from beside the hearth. Its sole was worn through, leather flapping loose. Without comment, he set about repairing it with needle and twine. The girl leaned close, watching his large hands move with surprising care. "You fix it good?" she asked. He grunted. "It'll hold." She grinned, gap-toothed, then pressed against her mother's side. Mei Lin's eyes softened, but a shadow lingered there too. She knew what Jonas had said last night was true. Men like those would not forgive humiliation. Their safety was temporary. Later that day, a knock rattled the cabin. Jonas's hand went instantly to his rifle. He opened the door a crack. A trapper stood there, beard crusted with ice, eyes wary. "Words out," the man said. "Those fellas you tangled with are stirrin' trouble. Talk of comin' back, maybe burnin' you out." His gaze slid past Jonas, landing on the woman and child inside. Something unreadable flickered across his face, part pity, part warning. "Best be ready." Jonas nodded once, shut the door. The bolts slid home heavy. Mei Lin had risen to her feet despite her pain. "They will come," she said quietly. Jonas set the rifle against the wall, voice even. "Let them." Her eyes searched his, as if trying to read what lay beneath the stillness. What she saw made her draw a slow breath, steadier than before. That night, as snow deepened outside, Mei Lin hummed her lullaby again. Jonas sat near, eyes closed, letting the sound weave through the fire's crackle. He did not join, but he did not turn away. When the song faded, she looked toward him. In the dim glow their faces were lined with fatigue, but also with something that had not been there before, the first fragile thread of belonging. The girl slept, the cabin quiet. Mei Lin adjusted the blanket over her daughter, then whispered, "You should not risk for us." "Why do you?" Jonas lifted his gaze to her, steady, unreadable. He did not answer. But the firelight caught the scar at his jaw, the lines of loneliness etched deep. His silence itself was an answer, one Mei Lin felt rather than heard. The wind pressed harder at the walls, carrying with it the echo of distant voices, the memory of fists striking. Safety was an illusion, fragile as glass. And yet, for this night, the cabin held. Mei Lin's fingers lingered against the blanket, her eyes on the man across the fire. She thought of her daughter's plea, "Marry her, please," and felt the weight of it settle like a stone in her chest. Outside, unseen, hoofbeats crunched through snow on the ridge, fading into the dark. Someone watching. Waiting. The snow did not relent in the days that followed. It pressed heavy on the roof, drifted against the door, and muffled every sound until the world beyond the cabin seemed to vanish. Inside, time stretched long, measured not by clocks but by the crack of logs in the hearth and the soft rhythm of breath from three souls bound together by circumstance. Jonas mended tools, split wood, set traps. Mei Lin moved as strength returned, sweeping the floor, tending the fire, smoothing her daughter's hair. The girl followed him outside sometimes, her small boots crunching alongside his, asking questions he rarely answered. She seemed to sense words were not his trade and filled the silence with her own chatter, bright against the gloom. Yet beneath the quiet, something sharper lurked. Jonas felt it in the way Mei Lin flinched at sudden noises, the way her eyes searched shadows even within the safety of timber walls. At night, when the girl slept, she would sit near the fire, staring into its heart as though seeing something far behind it. Jonas did not press. But one evening, as the storm eased into a gentler fall and the air in the cabin held the hush of waiting, she spoke. "I was 16 when I left Guangdong." Her voice was low, steady though threaded with an old ache. "My family sold what little we had to send me and my husband here. America promised gold, promised a better life. We believed." She drew a breath, her gaze fixed on the flames. He worked the railroad. Long days, dangerous tunnels, little pay. Then, the mountain took him. She pressed her hand to her chest, as if to hold in the memory. A cave-in. They left his body buried under stone. No priest, no grave. Just silence. Jonas's jaw tightened. He knew the kind of silence that followed loss. He said nothing, only fed another log to the fire, its sparks rising like ghosts. "I washed clothes after that. 4 settlers, 4 miners. Some spat when they handed me shirts. Some tried to take more than work. When I refused, they spread lies. Said I carried disease, said I was less than human. The beating you saw, it was not the first." Her hands curled in her lap, nails pressing her palms. "But it was the worst. This time, I thought they would kill me in front of my daughter." Her voice broke then, but she swallowed it, forcing strength back into tone. I told myself to endure. For her. She touched the girl's sleeping cheek. Always for her. Jonas watched the small hand against the child's face, the tenderness of it. He thought of his own wife once, cradling their baby boy. Fever had come swift, and in one cruel week, both were gone. He had not spoken their names aloud in years. But tonight, in the hush after Mei Lin's words, their memory pressed close. You fought, he said at last, his voice gravel. That matters. She looked at him then, truly looked, and saw in his scarred features a grief that mirrored her own. For a long moment, neither spoke, yet the air between them shifted, no longer strangers merely bound by survival, but two souls who recognized the same hollow places in one another. The next day, Jonas rode into town for supplies. He left at dawn, rifle slung, the cabin behind him fading into the whiteness. Mei Lin stood at the window until he was gone, her hand resting on the sill. She had not trusted men for so long. Trust meant risk, and risk meant pain. Yet with him, silence felt less like distance and more like steadiness. In town, Jonas felt the eyes on him. Men leaned against posts, spat into the snow as he passed. One muttered loud enough to hear, "Hermit thinks he can keep her. He'll learn." Another laughed, thin and mean. Jonas ignored them, bought flour and salt, bartered for ammunition. His silence was its own warning, but he knew well enough words spoken in the dark could gather like wolves. By the time he rode back, dusk had settled. Smoke from his chimney was a welcome sight. Inside, he found Mei Lin tending the fire, her daughter humming softly. The cabin smelled of broth. She turned as he entered, and for the first time since he had carried her from that shack, he saw the faintest lift of a smile touch her mouth. Not joy, but gratitude. It was enough to mark the cabin as something more than shelter, the beginning of home. That night, while the girl slept, Jonas worked oil into the stock of his rifle. Mei Lin sat across from him, hands folded, gaze thoughtful. They hate what they do not understand, she said. They fear what is different. You risk yourself for me and my daughter. Why? He lifted his eyes slowly. Firelight caught the planes of his face, carved deep with years. Lost my family, he said simply. I know what it is to stand alone. Her breath caught at the plainness of it. No grand speech, no reaching for pity, just truth. She nodded, and in that nod something inside her yielded, a piece of the burden loosening, even if only slightly. But peace was brief. The following afternoon, hoofbeats thundered past on the ridge. Jonas stepped outside, snow crunching under his boots, eyes narrowing against the glare. Two riders crested the rise, their laughter carried on the wind. One raised his arm in mock salute, shouting down, "Enjoyin' your China woman, Graham? You'll pay for stealin' what ain't yours." They spurred their horses, vanishing into the trees. Mei Lin stood in the doorway, her daughter clutching her skirts. Jonas looked back at them, then at the ridge. He felt the threat in his bones. It was not a matter of if they would come. The only question was when. That evening he began his preparations. He cleaned his rifle, checked the traps near the tree lean, stacked wood higher against the walls. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who had lived through ambush before. Mei Lin watched, her brow furrowed. She asked no questions, only helped where she could, gathering kindling, sweeping the floor, making broth to fill the air with warmth. Later, when the girl had fallen asleep by the fire, Mei Lin sat beside Jonas on the porch. The sky above was clear at last, stars scattered like frost. Her breath plumed white. "They will come," she whispered. Jonas's gaze stayed fixed on the dark line of trees. His answer was steady, calm as stone. "Let them." Something in the way he said it, not defiance, not recklessness, but certainty, settled deep into her. She drew her shawl tighter and sat in silence beside him, letting the cold seep into her bones, trusting for the first time that perhaps she was not alone in the fight. The days that followed held a fragile rhythm. Jonas taught the girl how to set a simple snare. Mei Lin mended his coat where the fabric had frayed. Small things, gestures that spoke louder than words. But each night, Jonas kept his rifle within arm's reach, and each night Mei Lin lay awake longer than she should, ears straining for hoofbeats. One morning, as the girl gathered snow into a pan to melt for water, a shadow crossed the window. Jonas was outside before the knock landed. The trapper from before stood there again, face lined with worry. "They're gatherin'," he said bluntly. "Heard 'em in town. Talk of marchin' up here. Some want fire. Some want blood. I'd say you've got a day, maybe two." His eyes shifted past Jonas, to Mei Lin standing within. "Best be ready." Jonas gave a single nod. The trapper tipped his hat and rode off, his words hanging heavy in the winter air. Inside, Jonas began moving with purpose. He secured shutters, checked the axes, laid extra powder on the table. Mei Lin watched, her heart hammering. The girl sensed it too, her chatter quieting, her eyes darting between them. That night, the lullaby Mei Lin hummed trembled on her lips. Jonas sat listening, his scarred hands folded, gaze far away. When the song ended, he looked to her. "You should know," he said, voice low. "Once they come, there won't be any turning back. They'll keep after us till one side is gone." Her throat tightened. "Then we fight." The words surprised her even as she spoke them, but once free, they steadied her spine. Jonas studied her face in the firelight. For the first time, she did not lower her gaze. Snow began again, fine and steady, whispering against the roof. The girl stirred in her sleep, murmuring. Mei Lin brushed her hair from her forehead, whispering comfort. Jonas watched them both, something unnameable stirring in his chest. The wind shifted, carrying faint voices from the distance, too far to make out, but real. Jonas stood, every line of his body tense, listening. Mei Lin felt the change and rose beside him, heart pounding. Somewhere in the dark, men were already moving. The night broke open with fire. Torches flared against the dark, orange light flickering across snowdrifts and bare trees. The sound of men carried up the slope, boots crunching, voices rough, laughter hard as iron. The cabin, small against the mountain's weight, seemed to shrink in their glow. Inside, Jonas rose from his chair, rifle in hand, face set in stone. Mei Lin froze, her daughter pressed to her skirts, eyes wide with terror. Jonas looked at them once. The girl's fingers clutched at her mother's side, Mei Lin's hand trembling as it covered them. He did not speak. He only moved to the door and pulled the bolts loose, every sound sharp in the tense silence. He stepped outside into the storm. Snow whipped across the clearing, carried by a wind that cut like knives. Jonas stood tall, rifle steady, the firelight from the torches painting his broad shoulders. The settlers fanned out, a dozen men with guns, axes, and faces twisted by drink and hate. "Graham," one called, the leader, his hat pulled low, beard ragged with frost. "You've gone soft, hidin' a Chinawoman in your bed. Best hand her over, for we burn you out." Jonas said nothing. His silence was its own kind of weapon, heavier than any curse. The men shifted, uneasy at his stillness. Then laughter burst, cruel and jeering. "She ain't worth dyin' for," another spat. "She ain't worth breath at all." Inside the doorway, Mei Lin appeared. She had pulled her shawl close, face bruised but eyes alight with a quiet fire. She stood tall despite the tremor in her limbs. Behind her, the girl peered out, small and silent. The leader sneered, raising his torch higher. "See? She don't belong here. Not with us. Not with you. Give her back to us, and maybe we let you live." Jonas's voice cut through the wind, low and gravel, the first words he'd offered them in years. "No." The single syllable cracked the night like a shot. For a moment, all stilled. Then rage erupted. A man surged forward, torch swinging. Jonas fired. The crack of the rifle split the storm. The torch fell, hissing into the snow. Chaos followed. Men roared, charging. Gunfire sparked, flames whipping. Jonas dropped his rifle, swinging the butt into one man's jaw, then pivoted to slam his shoulder into another. Snow churned under boots, blood speckled white drifts. One settler lunged with an axe, blade glinting. Jonas caught his arm, twisted, forced it down. The man screamed as bone cracked. Jonas shoved him aside, turning just as another fist slammed into his ribs. He staggered but stayed upright, breath heavy clouds in the night. From the doorway, Mei Lin watched with terror and fierce resolve. When one man broke past Jonas, lunging toward the cabin, she seized the iron pot from the fire. She flung its contents, boiling broth and ash, into his face. He screamed, clawing at his eyes, falling into the snow. The girl cried out, but Mei Lin pulled her close, shielding her with her own body. Jonas fought like a man who had nothing left to lose. His fist struck, his knife flashed, his boots drove men back. But there were too many, circling, pressing in. His breath came ragged, blood dripping from a gash at his temple. He felt the weight of them like a tide, threatening to swallow him whole. Then the mountain itself gave answer. Snow that had hung heavy all week groaned above. A crack echoed across the ridge. Jonas's head snapped up. The storm shifted. And then it came, an avalanche, roaring, thunder made of ice. White fury tore down the slope, swallowing torches, men, shouts. The world vanished into a blinding surge of snow. Jonas grabbed the cabin's post, bracing as the edge of the slide rushed past. Settlers screamed, their cries cut short by the roar. The earth trembled beneath, snow tearing trees from root, burying all in its path. In moments, it was over. Silence returned, deep and suffocating. The clearing lay altered, half the men gone under the mountain's weight. The rest scattered, fleeing into the night, leaving only darkness and broken torches. Jonas straightened slowly, chest heaving. His face was bloodied, coat torn, but he still stood. He turned toward the cabin. Mei Lin was there, clutching her daughter, both wide-eyed. Relief broke across her features when she saw him still alive. She stepped forward, crossing the threshold, her shawl slipping. She knelt beside him, trembling hands reaching to touch the cut at his brow. He flinched, then let her. Her fingers were gentle, wiping blood away with the edge of her sleeve. She whispered in a voice raw but certain, "They will not come again." Jonas looked at her, at the bruises, the weariness, the quiet strength that had not been beaten out of her. For years he had lived without purpose, locked in grief. Tonight, in her eyes, he saw not weakness but fire. Something in him shifted, something he thought buried with his wife and child. The girl slipped from her mother's arms and clutched Jonas's coat. "You saved Mama. You saved us." Her voice shook, but her eyes shone. "Now you'll marry her, won't you?" The question struck again, small yet piercing. Mei Lin froze, her face flushing with both shame and longing. She started to hush her daughter, but Jonas did not move away. His gaze stayed fixed on Mei Lin, steady, searching. Dawn broke slow, light seeping pale over the snow-laden ridge. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin against the sky. Jonas stood with Mei Lin at the edge of the clearing, the child between them. The mountain loomed behind, the land stretched wide before. Jonas's voice came rough, spare as ever. "Take my name. You'll be safe here." It was not romance, not poetry, but it was shield and promise, carved from a man who spoke with deeds, not flourishes. Mei Lin's lips trembled. Tears welled, slipping silent down her cheeks. She nodded once, sharp, as though afraid the moment might break if she lingered. The girl pressed her hands together, smiling through exhaustion. Jonas placed his broad hand gently over Mei Lin's. His scarred fingers dwarfed hers, but the weight was not heavy. It was steady. She did not pull away. Above them, the sun broke through cloud, gilding the snow with light. The air was still sharp, the world still cruel, but within that clearing something had changed. The cabin was no longer a hermit's refuge. It was a home, hard won, fragile, but real. The mountain had taken lives before. Tonight, it had given something back. Jonas looked at Mei Lin and the child, his voice low, carrying only enough for them. "They'll find no victory here." Her answer was not in words, but in the way she leaned, the way her hand tightened around his. The girl, caught between them, whispered with a final certainty of children who believe what they see. "Now we're a family." The words lingered in the cold air, fragile, luminous. Jonas did not correct her. Mei Lin closed her eyes, a single tear sliding free. Behind them, the land lay altered, scarred by storm and avalanche. Ahead, the horizon glowed faint with dawn. The cabin, small against the wilderness, stood with smoke rising like a signal to heaven. The cruelty of men had come with fire and hatred. The mountain had answered with fury. What remained now was silence, broken only by the crackle of fire within, the whisper of wind, and the faint hum of a lullaby carried from Mei Lin's lips as she held her daughter close. Jonas stood beside them, shoulders square, rifle still within reach but lowered now. For the first time in years, he felt the weight on his chest ease, replaced not by joy, not yet, but by something steady. Belonging. The girl's words echoed in the quiet. "Now we're a family." Snowflakes drifted soft around them, falling into hair, onto lashes, melting against warm skin. The world was still cruel, still vast and dangerous, but here, in this cabin on this mountain, they had carved out a space that cruelty could not claim. And though dawn lit the land pale and uncertain, within Jonas's chest burned a fire that would not easily go out. Cruelty came to the mountains that night, and it was answered not by speeches, but by the steady resolve of a man who refused to look away. A bruised woman, a frightened child, and a hermit who thought himself finished with life, all found a new beginning in the firelight of that cabin. And maybe that's the truth we forget too easily. Sometimes family isn't given, it's forged, in snow and struggle, when someone chooses to stand. If this story stirred something in you, don't let it fade. There's another tale waiting, one even more heartbreaking, more breathtaking, more unforgettable than this. Click on the story glowing on your screen, and let me take you deeper into the Wild West, where love and survival walk hand in hand. I'll see you there, partner.